I never thought I'd see the day when my own flesh and blood, the boy I raised with my bare hands, would look me in the eye and tell me I wasn't welcome. I had spent my entire savings, $20,000, on a vacation to Hawaii. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, one last happy memory before my old age slowed me down. But when the day came, when the tickets were in hand, the bags were packed, and my heart was full of excitement, my son turned to me with a cold, dismissive face. "Dad, I forgot to buy you a ticket. Go home." Those words sliced deeper than any knife. The world around me blurred as if I were invisible. An old man discarded like garbage. His wife smirked. My granddaughter looked away. And I stood frozen, suitcase in hand, fighting back tears. Forgot? No, he didn't forget. He wanted me out of the way. You want to know how I know? Because what came next revealed everything. And that was the moment I swore I wouldn't be the one left broken. If he thought betrayal would silence me, he was about to learn what a father's revenge really looks like. I wasn't born into wealth, not even comfort. My hands have known the weight of bricks and the sting of blisters more than they've known rest. From the day my son's mother walked out, leaving us both standing in that cold apartment, I made a silent vow. He will never feel abandoned again. I worked 2 jobs back then. Days on construction sites, nights cleaning offices. I remember coming home, my body aching but my heart swelling just seeing my boy asleep on the couch, his school books scattered on the floor. I gently pull a blanket over him and whisper, "Daddy's here. Always." We didn't have much, but I made sure he had everything he needed. New shoes for school, even if it meant I wore mine until the soles had holes. A warm meal on the table, even if I went to bed with an empty stomach. I still remember one winter when the heater broke. I gave him my only blanket and told him I wasn't cold, while I shivered all night on the floor. His smile the next morning. That made every sacrifice worth it. When he wanted to play baseball, I bought him a glove, second-hand but polished like new. I never missed a game. I cheered louder than anyone, even when I had to rush straight from work in dusty boots. The other parents looked down on me, but I didn't care. I was proud of him. College wasn't cheap, but I found a way. I sold the only piece of jewelry my late father had left me, his watch, to help pay tuition. Watching my son walk across that graduation stage, I thought to myself, this is it. This is why I lived. And when he met the woman who would become his wife, I opened my arms wide. I wanted him to have the family I never had. I paid for their wedding, every last detail, because I believed love deserved a strong beginning. Years later, when they bought their first house, it was my savings that made the down payment possible. He promised me, "Dad, you'll always have a pen. A's here." And I believed him. Foolishly, I believed. But as time passed, I noticed things. Family dinners grew quieter. My chair at the table felt further away. They stopped asking me about my day, my thoughts, my life. Still, I told myself, it's fine. Families change. I just need to give them space. What I didn't realize was that the space I gave them was slowly turning into a wall. And on the other side of that wall, I was no longer Dad. I was a burden they wanted to leave behind. We arrived at the airport with my suitcase and a heart full of hope. I still remember the sun on my face, the sticky warmth of Florida humidity from the taxi ride. Hawaii felt a breath away. I clutched my phone because the confirmation was there, the message I'd sent my son the week before. I transferred the money. "Book the tickets, please." I trusted him. I always had. Then he looked at me like I'd asked for something shameful. "Dad," he said, slow and careful, "I forgot to buy you a ticket. Go home." For a full beat I thought it was a joke. My mouth opened and closed with no sound. The fluorescent glare of the terminal lights flickered, and every announcement swelled to an unbearable pitch. I held the phone up. "I sent you 20,000. The transfer cleared." My voice sounded small against the drone of people and rolling suitcases. He didn't take the phone. He wrapped his arm around his wife and smiled the way couples do when they're keeping each other's secrets. We thought it'd be better if it was just us, she said, like she was describing a picnic plan and not excising me from my family. Shock hit like ice. My knees went weak. I felt like I'd been pulled out of my own life and dropped on polished tile. You used my money to do this? I whispered, incredulous, because the idea felt impossible. Betrayal didn't belong in our family. You don't understand, he said, as if there were an explanation that would make my stomach unclench. We thought, well, you wouldn't enjoy it. You bother the kids. You're slow on flights. It's awkward. His words folded around me like a cold hand. My granddaughter squeezed my sleeve, embarrassed, and the look she gave me, half pity, half apology, ripped me open more than any insult. People were watching. A couple nearby shifted their bags and glanced over, with that polite cruelty strangers reserve for scenes they don't want to be part of. My face burned. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold on to the printout of my bank receipt. I showed it to him anyway. Proof of the transfer, time, amount, confirmation number. He glanced at it like a stranger's grocery list. Dad, stop making things difficult, his wife snapped. We don't have time for this. She said we as if I wasn't part of the word. Sadness pooled first, an endless, cold well. I thought of all the nights I'd fallen asleep on the living room couch so he could have his own bed. I thought of the watch I'd sold to pay for his tuition. I thought of every scraped knee I'd bandaged and every exhausted paycheck I'd handed over. Those memories, which once warmed me like a hearth, curdled into shame in front of 30 people with rolling suitcases. Disbelief followed the sadness like a stubborn ghost. I replayed the last months in my head, the way I handed him the envelope marked vacation, his promise. I'll take care of it, Dad. How easy it was to believe, how naive I had been. I dug through my messages, calling up the chat where he'd replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Where was the mistake? Where was the human error in a life built by intention? When I asked him to explain, really explain, he shrugged, the smallest gesture, as if my confusion were a minor inconvenience. We wanted a private trip. You'd make it complis, he cated. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. The phrase landed like a slap. Greed isn't always about money. Sometimes it's about squeezing out the part of you that insists on being seen. Anger rose like a physical thing, hot and bitter. It started behind my ribs and spread to my throat. My voice came out louder than I meant. You took my money and you left me here, I said. You used what was mine to buy a life that doesn't include me. His face hardened. You should go, Dad. He said it like reading from a script. His wife murmured, This is for the best, as if she were consoling herself, not me. My granddaughter's hand slipped from mine, and she walked away, eyes down, as if I were contagious with shame. The world felt small and narrow and screaming. Small because the betrayal was from the smallest space of trust. Narrow because the looks from strangers funneled my dignity into a single humiliating beam. I wanted to run after them, to grab the suitcase and demand what was mine. But 2 decades of raising him had taught me restraint. I paused, breathing heavy, tasting salt and bile. I remember standing there, feeling every small thing that had tethered me to life loosen. The empty chair at the table, the unread cards on the mantel, the faded photos where his face used to beam at me with gratitude. It wasn't just abandonment. It was an erasure, a quiet dismantling of years stitched together by sacrifice. Their casual cruelty, those little comments about my being slow and making things awkward, burned the worst. Greed made them ugly. Disrespect made them cruel. The humiliation wasn't theatrical. It was quiet and precise, like the clipping of a thread until my place in their lives was gone, and they didn't even look back to see if I'd fall. Anger shifted into a sharper, more dangerous clarity. It wasn't the blind fury that hollered in the moment. It was a saint, eddy, cold realization that I had been betrayed not for what I had, but because they could. The betrayal was deliberate. The forgetting was a choice. The forgetting was the loudest word of all. I closed the door behind me, and the click sounded like the final nail in a coffin. The apartment was too quiet, too full of echoes. Every creak of the floor sounded like a memory walking away. I sank into the old armchair, and for a long minute I did nothing but breathe, counting each inhale like it might steady my pulse. Grief came first, heavy and slow, the kind that wraps itself around your ribs and refuses to loosen. I thought of the nights I worked double shifts, the Sunday mornings I missed because overtime called, the birthdays I cut short so he could have more. My hands remembered the work even when my mind wanted to forget. Calluses shaped like sacrifices. I watched the empty cup on the table and pictured it full of laughter that used to belong to us. Memories came at me like a slideshow. His first bike ride, the bandage I put on his knee, his college graduation when I cried behind sunglasses. Each memory stung because it was proof that love had been given until there was nothing left to offer. At first I let the sadness flood me. I let the tears come because they felt like cleansing. But tears didn't fix the ache. They simply watered a seed that had been quietly growing inside me, the seed of something fiercer than pain. I found myself replaying his words, not just the spoken ones, but the way they sounded like instructions to a door that would slam shut on me. Go home. Simple, casual, calculated. Those 5 words carved a new line through my life, an edge I hadn't noticed until it cut deep. I thought of pride, mine, bruised and broken, and the way it stood between me and begging. I would not beg. I had never begged for respect. I had earned it the hard way. Anger started as a small ember, a hot prickling behind my eyes. It grew with each recalled slight, the rolled eyes, the stolen silence at dinner, the way they spoke about me as if I were a cheap piece of furniture. I pictured him on that plane, sunlight on his face, laughter in his throat, while I stood under harsh airport lights like an exhibit of what they no longer wanted. The more I thought, the clearer something became. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice. They chose to erase me. Grief and disbelief slipped away and left room for something sharpened and certain. Determination. I felt the muscles in my jaw clench as if to hold together the pieces that might otherwise scatter. I told myself quietly at first, enough. The word tasted small and then enormous in my mouth. It wasn't just about money. It was about being visible, about dignity, and about teaching a lesson that wouldn't be learned through tears alone. My mind, which had been soft and forgiving for years, turned tactical. I began to inventory what they thought they had taken, my savings, my place in the family, my quiet presence. I started listing what they had underestimated, my resolve, my knowledge of their affairs, the network of people who still respected me. Images of late nights at the bank, of signatures on papers, of conversations about loans and guarantees slid through my thoughts. I realized how much I still knew, more than they assumed. I could feel a map forming in my head, a route from humiliation to recompense, not wild or vengeful in the moment, but planned, precise, and unyielding. The grief remained like a scar, visible, but not debilitating. Determination sat on top of it like armor. I stood up and walked to the mirror, looking at my reflection as if measuring a stranger. The lines on my face were deeper, but my eyes held a new brightness, not of madness, but of resolve. I whispered to myself, "You taught him how to live. Now teach him how to fall." The words were not cruel. They were a promise. I did not shout. I did not strike. I simply made a vow in the quiet of that room, a vow that would demand consequence for betrayal. I would take back what was mine, not with chaos, but with the same patience I had once used to build our life. Enough was not a fleeting feeling. It was the beginning of a plan. I placed my hand over my heart and felt it steady. Whatever came next, I would meet it with the dignity I was denied, and with a resolve that would not be softened by pleading. My voice was low, steady, certain. Enough is enough. I will not be invisible anymore. The first rule I set for myself was this: no theatrics. Revenge that screams is messy and soon forgotten. What I wanted was quiet, surgical, inevitable. So I started where I'd always started problems, by looking at the facts. Paperwork has always been my language, signatures, dates, balances. I went through every file I had kept, old receipts, bank slips, contracts I'd signed for him when he was starting out. The past was cluttered with evidence if you knew where to look. I made lists, ink on paper like a ledger of wrongs. Not just the $20,000 transfer, but the loans I'd guaranteed, the insurance policies, the names of the men who still respected me from the construction days, the partners who still answered my calls. Structure calmed me. Every step added a notch to the plan. Next, I called an old friend, Jose, my one-time foreman turned small-time lawyer. He owed me for saving his son's apprenticeship years ago. He listened without judgment and said 2 words that steadied me. We can. He became my sounding board and my legal eye. I didn't tell him everything. You don't show your entire hand when you want the other person to fold themselves. I asked questions. We talked guarantees, liabilities, what it would take for a bank to call a loan, and how quickly investors panic when a partner pulls out. He reminded me of timelines and paperwork I could use. Patience became my ally. I watched them from a distance. Social media posts, little family photos, the smug captions. I let them think I was shrinking back, that I had accepted my place. I posted no's. Thing. Silence is louder than anger when you use it right. I made a quiet visit to the bank that had their business account. I wasn't rude. I was courteous, the same man who'd cashed checks and helped others. I didn't threaten anything. I simply asked for information, what it would take for a guarantor to withdraw, what notices looked like, the timing of defaults. The clerk recognized me and treated me with respect. A few names slipped into my notebook. Then, I reached out to a former business partner of my son's, a man I had helped years ago with a small contract. He remembered my steadiness and agreed to meet me in a cafe under the pretense of catching up. I didn't tell him my goal. I let him talk about vulnerabilities in the company, the leaks he'd seen, the nerves among investors. He provided pieces I could fit together. I arranged small, strategic acts, a friendly call to the accountant to clarify tax liabilities, purely informational, an invitation to my son for dinner that seemed like reconciliation, but was actually a probe to see how he'd react when asked direct questions. I watched his answers like a man examining the grain in wood. There were risks, of course. I rehearsed contingencies. If the bank raised alarms, I had places to move money legally, and people who would vouch for me. If he sensed I was preparing, I would pull back and let him relax. False retreat is an old soldier's trick. I also cultivated a quiet moral narrative. I spoke with my granddaughter more often, not to sway her, but to make sure the truth had a soft place to land. Children see things adults rationalize away. I wanted her to know me beyond their edits. Every move was small and deliberate. A call here, a document requested there, a witness quietly reminded of dates and signatures. I never lied. I simply used the facts they thought were buried. That's the thing with betrayal. You don't have an need to invent a weapon. You only have to show the world what's already true. At night I mapped the sequence in my head. Withdraw guarantee, send formal notice, let investors and partners react, watch cracks form. But I kept the order hidden, even from Jose. People who know too much can warn the guilty. I practiced my face in the mirror, the same one that had smiled at hospital beds and graduation stages. Calm, measured, kind when needed, stone when necessary. My voice would not tremble when I spoke in front of them. There were moments I considered simpler satisfaction, a shouted accusation at a family gathering, a viral post detailing every slight. I discarded those. They were cheap and would have made me cheap. Instead, I learned patience. I learned to let their arrogance fill their lungs, while I kept mine empty and ready. I placed small seeds, casual mentions to people who mattered that a guarantor's withdrawal can be a polite, legal step. Those mentions were like whispers in a dry forest. The first spark, would find kindling. I lined up allies who had nothing to gain from cruelty. The bank clerk who respected honesty, the ex-partner who hated deceit, the lawyer who liked tidy endings. None of them loved me. They respected truth, contracts, and the discomfort of being lied to. That respect is powerful, quieter than rage, but more effective. I kept my granddaughter's visits natural, letting her keep her innocence while watching for any sign they were trying to rewrite the story. Children give away panic in the way they avoid eye contact, and I used those small tells to time my moves. Slowly, the plan took shape like a building rising from foundation to frame. I wouldn't rush the roof. The structure had to hold. Each calculated step would look accidental to them. That was the artistry. Make it appear like fate, not a man. I practiced walking away at the right moment. When the dominoes start to fall, don't stand where they land. I rehearsed silence. Sue. Small smiles, and the polite shrug that said, "You chose this." There's a part of me that wanted to scream the truth into the street so everyone would see them for what they were. But I kept that monster caged. Real power, I learned, is disguised as ordinary life. So I waited. I gathered documents, witnesses, and the kind of resolve that doesn't flash. It simmers. I left hints, but no evidence of intent. I let them keep their smug photographs, their sun-drenched memories, their belief that they had written the end. And every morning I woke with the same quiet certainty that justice was not a spectacle, but a sequence. What they didn't know, what they would never guess until it was too late, was that the moment I sat at their dinner table to reconcile, I would also be pressing a button that set the rest of their life into motion. They think I was forgotten. They think I am small. They are wrong. I remember the night I pressed send on the formal notice withdrawing my guarantee. The words were clinical and small, but they carried thunder in their wake. I didn't yell. I didn't weep. I hit send and folded my hands like a man who had finished a long, necessary job. The bank called within 48 hours. Their voice was polite, practiced. They had protocols. I let them do their work. In my mind, a plan set in motion, delicate, inexorable, like dominoes falling in a line I had measured 1,000 times. At first, it looked almost mundane. Phone calls scrambling in their living room, hushed arguments, a husband pacing while his wife tried to calm him with a hand on his back. I sat in my kitchen and listened to the small, human panic on the line when a partner called asking for assurances. The voice that had once comforted me was now pleading. "Dad, please," he said when he finally called. "I don't know what happened. Talk to the bank. We can fix this." His voice trembled with the kind of fear that only comes when a life you built on borrowed trust starts to unravel. I didn't spare him the theatrics of mercy. I offered him the same chance I'd always given, truth. "Tell me why," I said slowly. "Tell me the truth about the money." His silence was answer enough. Then the first twist arrived, not from me, but from his world. He lashed out in panic and tried to accuse me of malicious intent. He forged a hastily typed agreement and sent me screenshots claiming I'd been reimbursed. He even went so far as to post on social media a staged video of him caring for his father at home, playing to an audience I used to trust. I expected the theatrics. I had planned for them. Jose, my lawyer, had already anticipated counterattacks. He'd quietly filed a notice with the bank and preserved the timeline of my withdrawal. When my son presented his forged documents, the bank called him on it. His signatures didn't match. The deposit timestamps were impossible. He looked smaller than I'd seen him in years. That little bravado evaporated in an instant. But his next move was a stab I hadn't fully predicted. He attempted to move assets overseas and transfer property into his wife's name. He assumed my anger would be bluster, that I'd panic and let him slip the pieces away. He underestimated my patience. I had already spoken to the accountant who handled much of their paperwork. He admitted privately that things looked messy and that there were phantom expenses and invoices that didn't add up. He agreed to freeze certain transfers pending an audit. Then came the quiet betrayal that stung the most. One of his supposed partners, an old man I'd once helped, walked into my small living room, and handed me a folder. "You taught me better than this," he said. Inside were emails, unsigned contracts, and receipts that screamed of embezzlement. They had been padding expenses, funneling money out through shell invoices to support lavish vacations and renovations. It was greed dressed up as business. I didn't shout. I organized. I gave those documents to Jose and to the bank. Investors started asking questions. Calls that had once been warm turned curt. Mr. Langley, a small investor who'd always trusted my son, called me one morning, his voice hushed with betrayal. "We're pulling out," he said. When money retreats, structures built on thin air wobble. When investors fled, the company's credit lines collapsed like a dam. My son tried to salvage dignity by confronting me in front of my granddaughter, begging for my help to repair things. The look on his wife's face as she saw his panic was deliciously plain. Entitlement doesn't travel well into the territory of consequence. I refused to hand them a lifeline. I didn't want to teach them dependency. I wanted them to face the truth of their choices. They hired a lawyer to threaten me. Claims of defamation, coercion, spite. I invited their lawyer to coffee and slid across the table my ledger of facts. Bank confirmations, contract dates, email threads, and witness statements. He read the binder and left without words. Legal smoke dissipates in the face of paper. Publicly, the collapse was humiliating. News of the company's sudden troubles leaked. Authorized or not, investors don't stay quiet when their money is at risk. The social media posts my son had so carefully curated turned into a tomb of comments. Partners denying him, creditors filing notices, neighbors whispering. The same audience that once applauded their beach photos now critiqued the gaping holes in their story. But the real twist came when my granddaughter, small and honest, found the courage to pull me aside. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I remember you used to read me stories about heroes who didn't give up." Her eyes were steady. She was the truth I was fighting for. She testified in a simple, heartbreaking way about the coup at nights and the sacrifices she'd seen. Her words carried weight no forged document could match. When the auditors came, they found more than poor bookkeeping. They found intentional siphoning, payments routed to accounts that benefited the wife's side business and personal renovations disguised as company upgrades. The tax authorities opened inquiries. The bank accelerated repayment demands. The house mortgage, once thought secure, was suddenly in jeopardy as liens accumulated. I'll admit, there were moments where I felt guilty for taking such a hard line. But every time I looked back at the terminal where he told me to go home, I remembered the way he left me under those fluorescent lights. Justice, I realized, wasn't cruelty. It was balance. The final blow was a public hearing where creditors and partners laid out evidence. My son stood there, not as the confident man I raised, but as someone exposed, his voice small, his explanations thin. The judge ordered asset freezes. A trustee was appointed to evaluate claims. Lawyers negotiated settlements that would liquidate much of what they had amassed. Their home went on the market within weeks. The house that had once been a place of refuge for me now housed the consequences of their choices. They came to me later, humble, reduced to asking for help I could not, in good conscience, give. "Dad, we're sorry," he said. "We made mistakes." His wife's eyes brimmed, raw and unfiltered. I looked at them and felt a complicated peace. I had not shattered them out of malice. I had removed the props that allowed their cruelty to grow. In the weeks that followed, my name returned to conversations, but not as the man they'd belittled. People who had once ignored my calls visited with offers of work, of friendship, of small reparations. My granddaughter spent weekends with me, and in her laughter I found the echo of the life I'd tried so hard to protect. The revenge was not fireworks or public spectacle. It was meticulous, lawful, and devastating because it exposed truth. They lost the illusion of security, the currency of complacency. They were punished in the language they understood, loss of wealth, reputation, and the comfortable life assembled on someone else's kindness. When everything settled, I sat alone one evening and let the silence settle like dust. The victory tasted strange, sweet with relief, bitter with the knowledge that a family had been broken beyond easy repair. But I had taken back my dignity. I had shown that betrayal has consequences, and that a life built on someone else's generosity can be unmade by the very contracts that sustained it. In the end, justice arrived not with cruelty, but with unflinching truth, and that, in itself, felt like vindication. After the dust settled, my house felt quieter than ever. No more phone calls begging for guarantees. No more false smiles or sweet words hiding sharp edges. For the first time in years, I wasn't needed as a crutch for someone else's ambitions. The silence was heavy, yes, but it was also honest. My son and his wife lost almost everything. Their big house was sold to pay creditors, the luxury cars repossessed, the vacations vanished like smoke. They moved into a small apartment far from the polished neighborhoods they once flaunted. And while part of me pitied them, another part reminded me this was the cost of their choices. What hurt me most wasn't their fall. It was the empty chair at my table where my son should have been, not as a betrayer, but as family. Sometimes I stared at that chair and wondered, was there a moment I could have stopped this? Could love alone have saved him? But every time my mind wandered, I remembered the sting of those 5 words at the airport. "You're not coming with us." That memory kept me steady. It reminded me that this wasn't about vengeance alone. It was about dignity, about teaching a lesson. That betrayal carries weight. And yet life didn't just end with revenge. My granddaughter still came to visit. She curled up on the couch beside me, her laughter echoing through rooms that had once felt hollow. She asked me to tell her stories, not of revenge, but of perseverance, of kindness, of what it means to stand up for yourself when the world tries to step on you. Those nights with her reminded me I wasn't broken. I was still a father, still a grandfather, still a man who could give love without being used. I poured my energy back into the small joys I had long neglected, tending my garden, fixing up the old car in the garage, taking long walks where I didn't have to rush back for someone else's crisis. I found pieces of myself I had buried under years of sacrifice. But I won't lie, the scars remained. At family gatherings, whispers floated. Some called me cruel, others called me brave. I didn't argue with either, because the truth is, revenge doesn't erase pain. It only restores balance, and balance is sometimes the best we can ask for. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw a broken old man abandoned at an airport. I saw someone who finally stood up for himself, who refused to be trampled. I saw dignity staring back at me. The lesson is this: betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the ones we love most. But love without respect is just another form of chains. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and even for those who wronged you, is to let consequences do the talking. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: never spend your entire soul trying to buy someone else's love. Real love doesn't come with price tags or conditions. It comes with respect, loyalty, and truth. And the day you stop demanding those things is the day you stop valuing yourself. I spent $20,000 on a dream trip. I lost a son in the process, but what I gained was freedom, das Schneidi, and the reminder that even in betrayal, we can rise, rebuild, and walk forward with our heads held high. Because in the end, respect, self-respect, is the greatest revenge of all.